Pesach Wolicki is here with us. He is an opinion writer for both the Jerusalem Post, Israel 365. He's over on Real America's Voice as well. So we thought, what perfect time to pick his brain than right now, since we are getting prepped to take a trip to Israel as a show as we speak. So, my friend, it's good to connect with you again. How are you?
I'm doing well. I'm actually in Nashville right now. I'm going to be attending the National Religious Broadcasters Convention. I do a lot of Jewish-Christian relations work, so we're here to hang out with our Christian brothers and sisters.
So right now, I know your most recent piece, or one of your most recent pieces for the Jerusalem Post, was kind of analyzing the way Trump, this kind of dance that Trump is doing with Iran. Well, I want him to make a deal, but do I really want him to make a deal, right? And I was just telling our team, listen, man, I mean, I think we have one of our aircraft carriers not within striking distance of Iran as we speak. There's a non-zero chance, all right, that Daddy may take his belt off on the Ayatollahs while we're over in Israel. Okay, so what is that chance, do you think? I know that the president just said that he's given him about a 30-day deadline about a week ago, and I do not apologize for the very first question here being entirely self-serving, Pesach. So you tell us, what are the chances?
Well, first of all, if something happens while you're in Israel, trust me, Israel is a lot safer than you realize. It's certainly it's much safer than a lot of American cities are. So you'll be just fine. And, I'll be happy to, help you find a safe place to be if something happens while you're there. You'll actually, you'll experience firsthand the resilience and the joy that the Israeli people have, even as we go through.
We'll get the true, authentic experience, right? Is that what you're saying? What it really means to be in Israel on a daily basis?
Eastern treatment,
yes,
Steve.
all right, yes.
But in terms of what you said about about Trump, about the chances of attack, it's not just one aircraft carrier. There's a second one. The Bush is on its way over there now. The amount of military assets that are being amassed there are quite significant, and notably, the U.S. has been installing a THAAD anti-aircraft and anti-ballistic missile defenses right around its bases all over the Middle East. So it really seems that this is not just flexing muscles and talking trash. There really seems to be a lot of planning for kinetic action against the Iranian regime. What's more, after President Trump said to the Iranian people, help is on the way, and that encouraged them to go out into the streets in much greater numbers, it is without question, and I'm not saying this as an indictment of him, but without question, had Trump not said that, far less Iranians would have been killed. We know this because of the way past rounds of protests. Every few years, mass protests in Iran flare up, a few people get killed, and it all dies down pretty quickly. And we saw massive numbers of people being slaughtered by the regime, and they were emboldened. They were emboldened by what President Trump said. I personally, and through channels I have in Israel, monitor very closely what happens in Iranian social media that leaks out, and there's kind of a feeling of possibly being betrayed by Trump if the regime is not attacked at this point. So I think the chances of kinetic action are very high. If Trump goes down in history as having thrown a lifeline to the regime by cutting some sort of deal where they get to keep their heads down until he leaves office and then they're still in power, it's not going to do well for his legacy. So I think the chances of kinetic action are actually much higher than people think.
Let's say this occurs. This is what we discussed on our show quite prevalently when those demonstrations were at their halcyon and all over social media, right? And what we speculated was, if there was somebody that we thought could rule and subdue that nation with that power vacuum, chances are help would have been on the way. But maybe that's where there is real doubt, is what takes the place of the Ayatollahs, right? And that's my question to you then. What takes the place? What's prepared to lead and govern that country and not have it, for example, I mean, as you know, we got ISIS because they thought that, Al-Qaeda wasn't radical enough, okay? So what's to stop that place from splintering, from it becoming a beachhead for, now we get an even more radicalized state because someone cannot unite the people and govern them. What takes the place there?
Okay, there's a lot of questions in your question, but let's start with the fact that with one of the last things you said, what prevents this from becoming more radicalized? So I'm not going to play prophecy, and I can't tell you who exactly would replace the regime if and when it falls, but let's just educate your audience. Iran is very different than every other Muslim country in the Middle East in a number of important ways. First of all, the Iranian people are not that Muslim. Iran has the lowest rate of mosque attendance of any officially Muslim country. And also, it is not an Arab country.
Right.
And without, I don't know, I know I can be pretty politically incorrect on your show, but let me just say it this way. The Iranians are Persians. That's very different culturally than Arabs. They are highly educated. They're very secular. They're very pro-Western. This is not Libya or Iraq or Syria, that if the regime, which is one little mafia family, gets removed, then it splinters into a bunch of jihadist groups in their pajamas and sandals running around with AK-47s. That is not the situation in Iran. We're talking about, again, a very educated, fairly westernized country. If you think back before 1979, before the revolution, this was a very cosmopolitan, pro-Western, highly educated population. And they're very pro-democratic, meaning the people, let's put it this way, the people in the streets for the Arab Spring in places like Libya and Egypt and Syria, going back to that time, were Islamists. The people in the streets of Tehran are secular pro-Western. Okay, it's a very different type of country, and you don't have all sorts of jihadist militias in the hinterlands of Iran the way you have that in other Middle Eastern countries. So there could certainly be chaos if and when the regime falls, but not all regime changes are the same. So the Iranian, I actually have a lot of hope that if and when the regime falls, that it will be replaced by something that is pro-Western, because again, that's where the population is. What I think is most likely to happen is that a lot of the people running the show will remain in power, and that some second or third level bureaucrats will overthrow the top mullahs, because secretly a lot of them are actually quite secular. So exactly what the regime change will look like, I don't know. And it's not the responsibility of the West, of the Americans, of the Israelis to figure out the regime change, because regime change can only happen from within. Even all the bombing America will do cannot bring down the regime. They can create the conditions where the regime is so weak that the people then rise up and bring it down. But what that looks like is not going to be the responsibility of the West, going in there. But again, there's really no chance of a kind of splintering like you're picturing in other Middle Eastern countries. Again, there will be chaos. Let me just also add, Steve, this is a very important point. In Muslim culture and in other Middle Eastern cultures that are sort of, quasi-Muslim even, 40 days after death is the end of the official first stage of the mourning period. And traditionally, with political deaths, on the 40-day mark after the death, there is a kind of, it's almost like a second funeral. And in the Masa Amini protests in 2022, when that young girl who wasn't wearing a hijab was taken into custody and then killed in custody, which led to widespread, that was the last mass protests in Iran, they broke out in a mass way on the 40th day after she was killed. The 40-day mark after January 8th and 9th, when the lion's share of the slaughter of Iranian civilians took place, is coming tomorrow and the next day. And they've already called those who led these protests. These protests were started by the bazaar shop owners, who really were the engine that drove this whole round of protests that we're still in the aftermath of. They've called for a national strike tomorrow and the next day, and for people to come out into the streets on Thursday. And we could be seeing another round of this with people pouring out into the streets, and then the Iranian regime will, even more under the microscope of Trump and his people, be really put to the test of whether or not they open fire on their people again. So we're actually in the calm before the storm in a number of different ways.
Let's test your analysis and retcon it in the opposite direction then. How has the Iranian regime then been able to hold on to power for as long as it has?
Well, it's a very sophisticated regime, and it partially has to do with the culture that I just mentioned. If it was ruling over a whole bunch of Sunni militias like the Afghanistan or Iraqi population, it might have been toppled from within. But the Persian people are actually a pretty peaceful, docile people. and they don't have weapons. They don't, and there's a very strong surveillance state, a very strong alliance with the Chinese who help them with their surveillance state. How have they stayed in power a long time? When they start killing people, everyone runs back into their homes, which is what we saw. This has happened repeatedly over the years, and you know, they still have cash because they sell their oil to the Chinese Communist Party. 90% of the oil that this oil-rich nation produces is sold to the Chinese Communist Party, providing them a financial engine that allows them to keep going. How have they been able to hold on so long? Again, it's a brutal regime. There are brutal regimes that hang on a very long time. You know, we see it. You know, the Soviet Union lasted a long time. North Korea is lasting a long time. But the Iranian regime is weaker right now than it's ever been.
Is there anybody in the IRG there, the military structure? Is there an al-Sisi level figure there that I guess maybe we'll describe as pragmatically cooperative at times, right? Because you've told us the citizenry is unarmed, and yet there's a massive military presence there within that Iranian army there, right? Okay. I can't imagine all their military leaders are going to be like, you know, Viva la Revolution and democracy arrives, right? They're the ones sitting on the guns. You know, human nature is everywhere as well as I do, right? They're going to want to have a say in what happens next. So is there an al-Sisi-like pragmatically cooperative figure within that military regime that could be propped up potentially?
Okay, I'm gonna answer your question by giving you a lay of the land of how the Iranian military is structured. There are actually two armies. Okay, there's the Iranian army, and then there's the IRGC. The IRGC is not the Iranian army; it's the regime army.
Right.
So there's actually two armies in Iran. One of them serves the regime, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, and then there's the Iranian military. The Iranian military is really not participating in the suppression of the people. In fact, when the supreme leader at the beginning of this called on the Iranian army to step in and suppress the riots, they kind of held back, and they're kind of sitting it out. It's the IRGC that is suppressing the people, and the IRGC itself has within it Iranians who are part of the regime, but it also has a lot of imported jihadists who are Arabs from other Shiite militias in the area. And that's who's been doing the killing of the Iranian people in the streets, because the actual Persians who are in the IRGC have refused orders to fire on their people. And the regime also realizes that telling people to shoot their own cousins is a bad idea. So a lot of the killing's been carried out by non-Iranians who are kind of hired guns in the IRGC. This is all a way of answering your question, in that when the time comes, there are enough moderates and anti-regime people in the military that they will topple the regime. That's probably what's going to happen.
Final question. We got about a minute here. 1 year from now, is the current Iranian regime in place, do you think?
You know, it's up to the Iranian people. Again, America, here's my worst case scenario. America bombs them and bombs them and bombs them. They keep their head down. They suffer the blows. They fire ballistic missiles in all directions. And if they manage to kill a few Americans on any base in the Middle East, even if it's 1 or 2 or 3 Americans, a lot of our friends on the right, a lot of people in our camp, in the America First camp, are going to be clamoring for Trump to stop this whole thing and get out of there because Americans are dying. And as long as America stops short before the regime falls, they could reconstitute themselves, keep their head down until Trump's out of office, and then all bets are off. So I'm not willing to say that the Iranian regime is going to be gone in a year from now. Until it falls, it's there.
Pesach, where can people find your work, brother? That was great stuff.
Thank you very much. So I'm with Israel 365 Action. You can find on our YouTube channel at Israel 365 News. I put up explanatory videos about the Middle East 3 times a week. I'm also on X at Rabbi PW, and I have an author page at the Jerusalem Post, Israel's major English language daily.
Really, that was really great analysis, man. Appreciate you. Thank you. We'll do it again.